Before we dive into today's shocking story of family betrayal and sweet revenge, take a moment to subscribe to Revenge Janet and hit that notification bell. You'll never miss out when manipulative in-laws get exactly what they deserve. Our community knows that karma always collects its debts, and sometimes it needs a little push. Now settle in for a tale that proves blood is not always thicker than water, especially when family becomes your worst enemy. They say you do not just marry a person, you marry their family. What they fail to mention is that sometimes, that family is plotting your destruction from the moment you say, "I do." I learned this lesson through 3 years of psychological warfare with my in-laws. A battle that ended with me orchestrating their complete social and financial ruin. They never saw me coming. That was their first mistake. When I first met David's parents at our engagement dinner, they seemed like the picture-perfect family. Evelyn Carter was immaculately dressed in designer clothes that subtly communicated their wealth without being ostentatious. Richard Carter had the firm handshake and confident demeanor of a man who had built a successful investment firm from the ground up. They lived in a sprawling estate in the most exclusive neighborhood in town, hosted charity galas, and moved in social circles that included judges, politicians, and old money families whose names adorned buildings throughout the city. I was decidedly not from their world. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 19, leaving me to put myself through college while working 2 jobs. I had no family connections, no trust fund, no pedigree. What I did have was determination, intelligence, and genuine love for their son, who I had met in my final year of law school where we were both at the top of our class. "So, Melissa," Evelyn had said during that first dinner, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "David tells us you grew up in Lakeside? I do not believe I am familiar with that area." The slight pause before she mentioned my hometown made it clear she knew exactly where it was. On the wrong side of the tracks, a working-class neighborhood that people like the Carters only saw when they took a wrong turn. "Yes, it is about 30 minutes north of downtown," I responded pleasantly. "It has changed a lot in recent years. There is a lovely farmer's market on weekends now." "How quaint," she replied, exchanging a look with her husband that spoke volumes. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent apology for his mother's condescension. He had warned me that his parents could be a bit status-conscious, which I later realized was like saying the ocean could be a bit wet. Still, I was determined to win them over. David loved them, spoke of his childhood with genuine warmth, and clearly valued their approval. I told myself that they were just protective of their only son, that they would come to accept me once they got to know me better. I could not have been more wrong. The campaign against me began subtly. Evelyn would accidentally exclude me from family events, then act horrified that David had misunderstood her invitation. Richard would make pointed remarks about families with similar backgrounds staying together, thinly veiled suggestions that I was from the wrong social class for their son. At our wedding, which they insisted on planning and paying for despite our protests, Evelyn seated my few remaining distant relatives and friends at tables far from the main action, while filling the prime spots with the Carters' social connections, many of whom had never even met David or me before. The seating arrangement was a perfect metaphor for what they wanted. Me, and any reminder of my background, pushed to the periphery of their son's life. After the wedding, things escalated. We had purchased a home halfway between David's family estate and the law firm where we both worked. It was a beautiful craftsman that needed some updating but had excellent bones and a lovely garden. I had fallen in love with it immediately, envisioning our future children playing under the massive oak tree in the backyard. "It is certainly cozy," Evelyn had said during her first visit, making cozy sound like a terminal disease. "But do not worry, darling. I am sure you can sell it for a minimal loss once you come to your senses and move into something more appropriate for a Carter." David defended our choice, but I could see the seeds of doubt his mother had planted beginning to take root. He started pointing out flaws in the house that had never bothered him before. He began mentioning properties in his parents' neighborhood that were coming on the market. The Carters' influence over their son was powerful, and I was witnessing it in action. The real trouble began when I made partner at our firm a full year before David. We had both been on the partnership track, but my case record was slightly stronger. And the senior partners had been impressed with a particularly complex class action lawsuit I had successfully argued. It should have been a moment of celebration for both of us. Instead, it became the catalyst for the Carters' most aggressive campaign yet. I simply do not understand how they could overlook David, Evelyn complained during an uncomfortable dinner at their home the week after the announcement. Everyone knows the Carter name carries significant weight in this city's legal circles. It is not about names, Evelyn, I said as diplomatically as possible. The firm tracks win rates, billable hours, and client acquisition. The metrics are quite objective. Objective? Richard scoffed. There is nothing objective about business decisions, Melissa. It is about relationships, connections, understanding how the game is played. Perhaps if David had not been so distracted in recent years, he would have had time to cultivate the right connections. The implication was clear. I was the distraction. I had somehow held David back, despite the fact that we worked equally demanding hours and supported each other's careers unreservedly. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing to contradict his father. That night, for the first time, we had a serious argument about his parents' behavior. Can you not see what they are doing? I asked, trying to keep my voice level despite my frustration. They have been trying to undermine me, undermine us, from the beginning. They are just old-fashioned, David defended weakly. They want what is best for me. And they do not think that includes me, I stated flatly. That is not true. They just need more time to get to know you. It has been 3 years, David. 3 years of subtle insults, exclusion. And now they are blaming me for your partnership timing? When does it end? He had no answer for that, and we went to bed with the issue unresolved. It was the first fracture in what had been a solid relationship, and I could almost hear Evelyn's satisfied whisper in my ear. The first crack is all it takes. The situation deteriorated rapidly after that night. Evelyn began stopping by our house unannounced during times she knew I would be home alone, ostensibly to drop off things for David, but really to make cutting remarks about everything from my housekeeping to my wardrobe. Richard started inviting David to men-only social events where he would be introduced to the daughters of their friends, women with the right background, who would be more suitable partners. The most disturbing development came when Evelyn arranged for David's high school girlfriend, Catherine Wellington, to join the board of the charity where she served as chairwoman. Suddenly, Catherine was ever present at family events, always standing a little too close to David, laughing a little too hard at his jokes, reminiscing about their shared past in ways that deliberately excluded me. Catherine has just gone through such a difficult divorce. Evelyn would sigh dramatically. It is so important for her to be surrounded by people who truly know her, who understand where she comes from. I tried to discuss my concerns with David, but he accused me of being paranoid. Catherine and I have been over for more than a decade, he insisted. Mother is just trying to help an old family friend through a tough time. But I saw the strategic glances between Evelyn and Catherine, the way they would orchestrate moments alone for Catherine and David, the carefully crafted narrative they were building about the successful, socially prominent ex-girlfriend who had so much more in common with David than his working-class wife. The final straw came on our 3rd wedding anniversary. David had promised to take the day off, so we could drive to the coast for a long weekend. I had made reservations at the bed and breakfast where we had spent our mini honeymoon, excited for the chance to reconnect away from work and family pressures. 2 days before our planned trip, David informed me that we would need to cancel. His father had arranged an important golf outing with potential clients who were only in town for the weekend. It was too significant an opportunity to miss. It is our anniversary, David, I reminded him, trying to mask my hurt and disappointment. I know, and I am sorry. We can celebrate the following weekend. These clients could bring in millions to the firm. It could be exactly what I need to make partner. The fact that he saw this as an opportunity to catch up to my partner status told me everything about how deeply his parents' manipulation had affected him. They had successfully reframed my professional achievement as a competition that their son was losing, and by extension, that the Carter family name was being diminished. Your father did this deliberately, I said quietly. He knows perfectly well it is our anniversary weekend. David's expression hardened. Not everything is a conspiracy, Melissa. Sometimes work has to come first, something you, of all people, should understand. The implication stung. My dedication to my career had become another weapon in the Carters' arsenal. Another way to drive a wedge between us. I was either holding David back from success or prioritizing work over our marriage. They framed it however was most convenient for their narrative at the moment. I spent our anniversary weekend alone in our cozy house while David golfed with his father and prospective clients at their exclusive country club. When he returned Sunday evening, he was glowing with excitement. "It went incredibly well," he announced as he dropped his bags in the foyer. "The Westons are going to move their entire corporate portfolio to our firm. Father says it is practically guaranteed to put me on the fast track to partnership." I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to argue. "That is great, David." "Oh, and I ran into Catherine at the club yesterday," he continued, seemingly oblivious to my flat tone. "She mentioned there is an opening on the hospital board that would be perfect for you. Her uncle is the chairman, and she offered to put in a good word. Is not that thoughtful?" "Incredibly," I replied, the wheels in my mind beginning to turn. Catherine was extending an olive branch. Or more accurately, Evelyn was using Catherine to extend what appeared to be an olive branch, but was more likely a poison token. A way to say, "See how gracious we can be to you, despite your inadequacies?" That night, as David slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I had spent 3 years trying to win over people who had no intention of ever accepting me. I had compromised, accommodated, turned the other cheek. I had believed that patience and goodwill would eventually prevail. But the Carters were not interested in acceptance or family harmony. They wanted me gone and their son reunited with someone from their social circle. If they wanted war, they would have it. But I would not be fighting by their rules. I began by gathering information. As a lawyer, I knew that knowledge was power, and the Carters had been powerful for so long they had grown careless. Richard's investment firm had an impeccable public reputation, but all businesses have secrets, especially those built on the old boys' network of handshake deals and private club memberships. I reached out to a college friend who now worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission, ostensibly to catch up over lunch. Our conversation naturally drifted to our respective work, and I mentioned Richard's firm in passing, expressing curiosity about how boutique investment firms navigated the increasingly complex regulatory environment. "Carter Investments?" my friend said, raising an eyebrow. "They have been on our watch list for a while. Nothing concrete enough for an investigation, but there have been patterns that raised flags." I nodded thoughtfully, filing this information away. The regulatory burden must be immense these days. I cannot imagine trying to keep up with all the compliance requirements. "Some do not even try," she responded. "They rely on their connections to shield them from scrutiny. That approach has a limited shelf life in today's environment." That evening, I began a detailed analysis of Carter Investments' publicly available records and disclosures. On the surface, everything appeared legitimate, but there were inconsistencies in their reported returns compared to market performance. Subtle discrepancies that most people would overlook, but that my trained legal eye found suspicious. While I was building my case against Richard, I also turned my attention to Evelyn's carefully constructed social facade. The charity she chaired, the Westbrook Foundation, was her pride and joy and the primary source of her social standing. She spent countless hours organizing fundraisers, soliciting donations, and ensuring that her name was prominently associated with every successful initiative. Through a paralegal at our firm whose sister worked at the foundation, I discovered that Evelyn's accounting of charitable contributions was creative at best and fraudulent at worst. Donations were being used to fund administrative expenses that mysteriously aligned with renovations to the Carters' vacation property. Grant money intended for community programs was being diverted to consulting fees for companies owned by Evelyn's friends. None of this was being done in a blatantly illegal way. The Carters were too smart for that. But the ethical violations were clear, and in the world of high society philanthropy, perception was everything. My third line of investigation focused on Catherine Wellington, the not-so-innocent pawn in Evelyn's game to reclaim her son. Catherine projected an image of the perfect socialite, recently divorced but resilient, dedicated to charitable causes, impeccably connected. However, A few discreet inquiries through the legal community revealed that her divorce had been considerably messier than the sanitized version presented to society. Her ex-husband had filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity. Specifically, Catherine's affair with a married board member of the very hospital, where she now wanted to help me secure a position. Armed with this knowledge, I began to implement my plan. The first phase required patience. I needed to appear as though I was finally accepting my place in the Carter family dynamic, surrendering to their vision of how things should be. I accepted the hospital board nomination that Catherine had offered, graciously thanking her for the opportunity. I began deferring to Evelyn on social matters, asking her advice on everything from home decor to wardrobe choices. I accompanied David to the country club without complaint, and made a show of trying to fit into their world. "You seem different lately," David remarked one evening, about 2 months into my performance. "More relaxed about everything." I smiled. "I have been doing some thinking. Family is important to you, and your parents are part of who you are. Fighting against that was only causing tension between us." "I cannot tell you how much that means to me," he said, visibly relieved. "Mother mentioned how pleasant you were at the foundation luncheon yesterday. She thinks you are finally coming around." I bet she does, I thought, but outwardly I maintain my agreeable facade. We have all been trying too hard. Sometimes it is better to go with the flow. Phase 2 of my plan began at the Westbrook Foundation's annual gala, the highlight of the social season and Evelyn's crowning achievement as chairwoman. I had volunteered to help with the event, ingratiating myself with the foundation staff, and gaining access to their internal records in the process. What I found confirmed my suspicions and provided the leverage I needed. The night of the gala, everything appeared perfect on the surface. The city's elite had turned out in force, checkbooks ready to support the foundation's supposed work with underprivileged children. Evelyn was in her element, gliding from table to table, accepting compliments on the event's success. Richard was deep in conversation with the mayor and several city council members, no doubt leveraging the charitable occasion for business connections. David and I circulated separately, he with Catherine at his side, positioned there by Evelyn of course, while I chatted with the wives of Richard's business associates, playing the role of the dutiful if somewhat unsophisticated daughter-in-law. Just before dinner was served, I excused myself and made my way to the audiovisual booth where the evening's presentation was being prepared. The young technician recognized me as one of the event volunteers. "Mrs. Carter, is there something you need?" he asked. "Just a quick adjustment to the presentation," I said smoothly, handing him a USB drive. "Mrs. Carter Sr. asked me to add some updated figures to the financial slides. The newest donations came in just this afternoon." He nodded and made the substitution without question. When the lights dimmed and Evelyn took the stage to introduce the foundation's work, I watched from the back of the ballroom, my heart pounding with anticipation. For 15 years, the Westbrook Foundation has been a beacon of hope for children in need. Evelyn began, her practiced voice carrying perfectly through the sound system. "Tonight, I am proud to share the impact of your generous contributions over the past year." The first few slides proceeded as expected, smiling children in carefully staged photos, colorful charts showing the foundation's growth. And then came the financial slides, not with the sanitized numbers Evelyn had prepared, but with the actual figures I had meticulously documented. Administrative expenses broken down to show the personal expenditures, consulting fees traced to their ultimate recipients, discrepancies between reported program outcomes and actual services delivered. A murmur of confusion rippled through the audience. Evelyn faltered mid-sentence as she turned to look at the screen behind her, her expression shifting from confidence to horror as she realized what was being displayed. "There seems to be some mistake," she said, her voice suddenly strained. "If we could just..." But it was too late. The slides continued their relentless progression, now showing side-by-side comparisons of the foundation's public claims and the documented reality. The final slide displayed a QR code linking to a website where all the evidence was laid out in meticulous detail, available for anyone with a smartphone to access immediately. The room erupted in a chaos of whispers and exclamations. Richard rushed to the stage, attempting to take control of the situation, but the damage was done. Phones were out, people were accessing the website, and the expressions on the faces of the foundation's most prominent donors ranged from shock to outrage. I slipped out during the confusion, sending David a text that I had suddenly fallen ill, and taken a taxi home. By the time he returned to our house 3 hours later, the full impact of the evening's events was unfolding across social media, and in urgent conversations throughout their social circle. "What the hell happened tonight?" David demanded, his face ashen. "Mother is devastated. The foundation board is calling for her resignation. Father is trying to contain the situation, but it is a complete disaster." I arranged my features into an expression of innocent concern. "I heard there was some issue with the presentation? I am so sorry I missed it. That stomach bug hit me out of nowhere." "Someone deliberately sabotaged the presentation," he said, pacing our living room. "Whoever did it had access to internal foundation records, financial details that were not supposed to be public. It has to be someone with a vendetta against my parents." "That is terrible," I murmured. "But surely if the foundation's finances are in order, this can be cleared up quickly?" He stopped pacing and looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "The thing is, Father just admitted to me that some of what was shown wasn't entirely inaccurate. Just presented in the worst possible light, without context." I nodded sympathetically, while inwardly celebrating this first crack in David's perfect image of his parents. "I am sure there are explanations. Your parents have always been pillars of the community." Phase 3 of my plan unfolded over the next 2 weeks as the foundation scandal continued to dominate local news and social media. Anonymous tips, carefully planted by me, led to a formal investigation of the foundation's finances. Several board members, desperate to distance themselves from the growing scandal, began revealing additional details about Evelyn's management practices. Meanwhile, I had arranged for my SEC contact to receive an anonymous package containing the documentation of the irregularities I had discovered in Carter Investments' records. The timing was perfect. With Richard distracted by the foundation crisis, he was less attentive to the first signs of regulatory interest in his business practices. By the end of the month, both Carters were facing the complete collapse of their carefully constructed world. Evelyn had been forced to resign from the foundation, and had been dropped from every charitable board in the city. Richard was fielding increasingly pointed questions from regulators, and watching as nervous clients began quietly withdrawing their investments. Through it all, I maintained my role as the supportive daughter-in-law, expressing only concern for their troubles and never a hint of satisfaction. David was increasingly torn between defending his parents and confronting the mounting evidence of their ethical lapses. The final phase of my plan targeted the personal betrayal that had hurt the most: their attempts to engineer a reunion between David and Catherine. I arranged to have lunch with a former colleague who now worked at the firm representing Catherine's ex-husband in their divorce. Our conversation, carefully steered toward gossip about high-profile divorces, yielded exactly the confirmation I needed about Catherine's affair. That evening, I broached the subject delicately with David. "I heard something disturbing today." I began as we cleaned up after dinner. "About Catherine?" David sighed. "I am not sure I can handle any more disturbing news this month." "I understand, and I would not mention it except, well, your mother has been pushing her back into your life so persistently, and I would hate for you to be caught in something unpleasant." His curiosity piqued. David pressed me for details. I reluctantly shared what I had heard: that Catherine's divorce had been initiated by her husband after discovering her affair with Dr. James Bennett, the married hospital board chairman who had recently been instrumental in securing her position at the hospital. "That cannot be right," David protested. "Catherine told me, that she filed for divorce because her husband was emotionally abusive." "Perhaps that is true as well," I said carefully. "People's lives are complicated. I just thought you should know, given how much time your mother has been encouraging you to spend with her." The seed of doubt planted, I left David to process this information. The next day, I noticed him making a phone call from his home office, his voice low and serious. When he emerged, his expression was troubled. "I called my old friend Marcus from prep school," he said. "His wife is friends with Catherine's sister. You were right about the affair. Apparently, it was common knowledge in their circle, but everyone agreed to stick to Catherine's version of events publicly. He sat heavily on the couch beside me. Why would Mother push Catherine back into my life knowing this? She has always been so concerned about appearances, about the family reputation. Perhaps your happiness was not her primary concern, I suggested gently. That evening, David confronted his parents about Catherine during a tense dinner at their home. Evelyn attempted to dismiss the affair as unsubstantiated rumors, but Richard, already stressed from his mounting professional problems, let slip that they had indeed known about Catherine's indiscretion. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness on her part, Richard said dismissively. Everyone deserves a second chance. Besides, she comes from the right kind of family. That counts for something, especially in difficult times. The right kind of family? David repeated, his voice hardening. As opposed to Melissa, you mean? Let us be honest, David, Evelyn interjected, her facade finally cracking under the pressure of recent events. Melissa has never been a good fit for this family. We accepted your choice, but when we saw an opportunity to reconnect you with someone more suitable, you decided to manipulate me? David finished for her. To undermine my marriage? To push another woman at me? A woman you knew had cheated on her husband? We were thinking of your future, Richard insisted. The Carter name means something in this city, or it did, before all this trouble. We only wanted what was best for you. What was best for your social standing, you mean, David corrected. I see that clearly now. That night marked the final rupture between David and his parents. On the drive home, he apologized to me repeatedly for not believing my concerns about his parents' behavior, for not standing up to them sooner, for letting them treat me as less than. I have been blind, he admitted. They raised me to believe that our family name, our social position, was everything. I never questioned it until I saw how far they were willing to go, how many ethical lines they were willing to cross. Over the following months, the consequences of my carefully orchestrated revenge played out exactly as I had planned. The SEC investigation into Carter Investments uncovered significant irregularities, resulting in heavy fines and the eventual closure of the firm. Richard avoided criminal charges only by agreeing to a settlement that effectively ended his financial career and drained much of the family's wealth. The foundation scandal permanently damaged Evelyn's social standing. Former friends cut ties, charitable organizations kept their distance, and invitations to the social events that had been the center of her life dried up completely. The Carters were forced to sell their estate and move to a still luxurious, but far less prestigious condominium downtown. As for Catherine, the renewed attention to her divorce and affair led to her resignation from the hospital board. She eventually moved to another city, her usefulness to the Carter schemes exhausted. David and I remained together. Our relationship strengthened rather than weakened by the ordeal. He had seen his parents' true nature and made his choice. Me, our marriage, our values. We maintained minimal, cordial contact with the Carters, seeing them on major holidays but otherwise keeping our distance. A year after the foundation gala that had set everything in motion, David and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant when he raised his glass in a toast. To us, he said. And to the mysterious whistleblower who exposed my parents' ethical lapses at exactly the right moment. Whoever they are, their timing was impeccable. I smiled and clinked my glass against his. To whistleblowers everywhere. And to karma, which sometimes needs a little push in the right direction. He looked at me curiously for a moment, a question forming in his eyes, but then he simply smiled and took a sip of his wine. Some questions were better left unasked. Some suspicions better left unconfirmed. The Carters had declared war on me from the moment I entered their son's life. They had used every weapon at their disposal: social status, family loyalty, manipulation, even attempting to orchestrate infidelity. They had assumed that because I lacked their pedigree, their connections, their ruthlessness, I would eventually admit defeat and remove myself from the equation. What they failed to understand was that growing up without advantages had made me stronger, not weaker. It had taught me to observe carefully, plan meticulously, and strike decisively when the moment was right. It had taught me that true family is defined by love and loyalty, not by blood or social standing. Most importantly, they had underestimated the lengths to which I would go to protect my marriage and my dignity. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my restraint for lack of resolve. By the time they realized their error, it was too late. Their carefully constructed world was already crumbling around them. Some might call my actions extreme, even vindictive. But in the rarefied world the Carters inhabited, where appearances mattered more than reality and social standing trumped basic decency, it was the only language they truly understood. I had simply turned their weapons against them, exposed the rot beneath their polished exterior, and let the natural consequences unfold. In the end, justice had been served. Not by courts or authorities, but by the very social system they had weaponized against me. Their downfall came not from my direct accusations, but from the collective judgment of the community they had worked so hard to impress. A community that, when presented with the truth, had rejected them as thoroughly as they had once rejected me. And as for me, I had protected what mattered most, my marriage, my self-respect, and the future I was building with the man I loved. A future free from the toxic influence of in-laws who had never intended to accept me as family, who had planned my removal from the moment I arrived. Blood may be thicker than water, but actions speak louder than bloodlines. The Carters had made their choice, and I had made mine. They had fired the first shot in our private war, but I had ensured that I would be the one to fire the last. And as David and I left the restaurant that night, walking hand in hand toward a future shaped by our choices rather than his parents' expectations, I felt not guilt but satisfaction. The Carters had tried to destroy what I held dear, and they had failed completely. Sometimes karma needs a helping hand, and sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well. Especially when those who wished you ill are forced to watch from the sidelines of the life they can no longer control.